Welcome to week 1 of Year 6's English sessions for the spring term. This half term we're going to be looking at the book Stella by Starlight by Sharon M. Draper. But before we can actually get inside the book, which we've started in our whole class reading sessions, we need to have a little think about the setting, the context of the book, why what happens in the book takes place, and to think about some of the events surrounding it. In order to do that, we need to have a little look back at the Black history in the USA to give us some setting and context. What we're going to have a look at today is to sequence some historical events and think about why we use timelines in order to organize our ideas. We're going to understand the reasons behind the civil rights movement, and we're going to have a look at putting some dates in chronological order. To begin with, 1492, there was a man called Christopher Columbus who was an Italian explorer who accidentally landed on the shores of the new land, which were previously undiscovered. After he landed there, many other explorers came from other European countries like France, Spain, Holland, Portugal, and in particular England, and they claimed little parts of this land for themselves. In 1607, a colony was set up called Jamestown. It was named after King James I of England. It started with 100 men who were sent over from the Old World to the New World. The colonists grew tobacco, which was sent back to England, and it was sold for quite a hefty profit. With the money they made, they planted other crops like wheat, grapes, and corn, and other native foods to North America. By 1620, Jamestown, plus other settlements that sprang up nearby, had a population of about 4,000 people. In 1619, slavery begins. 20 African people were brought to the Jamestown colony aboard Dutch warships. They were slaves. They'd been taken over from their homes in Africa by force. They were beaten, they were chained up by men carrying weapons, and over the next 200 years or so, hundreds of thousands of Africans would be brought to America as slaves to work on plantations, especially to grow things like tobacco. In 1776 was the War of Independence. The colonies grew very wealthy, and many of the people called patriots no longer wanted to be ruled from across the ocean by England. Some of the people who lived there were called loyalists, and they were colonists who wanted to remain part of England. In 1793, the Patriots and the Loyalists went to war in the War of Independence, and the Patriots won. The United States of America was born. At this time, the new government ordered a census, and there were nearly 700,000 Africans and 3 million Europeans living in the new United States. In 1787, George Washington became the first American president. He used to be a general, and he fought in the War of Independence, and he owned a lot of land and also was very, very wealthy. He owned 11 slaves by the time he died, but had become opposed to the idea of slavery, and on his death, he said that his wife should set those slaves free. Between 1861 and 1865, there was a civil war in America. It was billed as the North versus the South. The southern states of America wanted to become a separate country from the northern states. Abraham Lincoln at the time was the president, and he wanted to abolish slavery. The leader of the southern states, or they were known as the Confederates, was a man called General Robert Lee, and he wanted to keep slavery. Many slaves worked on southern plantations. The North won the Civil War, but unfortunately at a big cost. Over 700,000 people died. In 1865, slavery was abolished in the whole of the USA immediately when the war ended. Now, slave owners were ordered to set their slaves free. Sadly, it was still going to be over 100 years before African American people had the same rights as white people. Also in 1865, December 24th, the Ku Klux Klan were formed in the southern state of Tennessee. They're sometimes known as the KKK, or more commonly, the Klan. The Klan were founded by Confederate Army veterans who believed that African American people shouldn't be free and they shouldn't be able to vote. Klan members would dress up in scary costumes with hoods and masks. They rode about on horses at night and they threatened and frightened African American people. They beat any African Americans who tried to vote, and they would intimidate communities with whippings and sometimes murder. They burned African American people's houses down, and they drove farmers from their land. By 1955, a lady called Rosa Parks came to prominence in the southern state of Alabama. The area was segregated, which basically meant that African American people had to live in different areas of town. They had to go to different schools. They had to attend different churches and shop in different shops. They could use different lifts and even had to use different water drinking fountains to white people. She led a protest and refused to give up her seat on a bus to a white man. She was arrested for breaking state law. We shall learn more about Rosa Parks later in the term. In 1960, Cassius Clay, who later changed his name to Muhammad Ali, was a famous American boxer. He won a gold medal in the Olympics in Rome. On his return to the USA, he went to meet his coach in a restaurant, but when he tried to walk in, he was told that blacks get served round the back. He wasn't allowed to eat in the same area of the restaurant as white people. In protest, he went over to a bridge and threw his medal away. Martin Luther King was another prominent figure that we're going to look at later in the term, and he lived between 1929 and 1969. Here's a quote where he says, "Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter." He was called a civil rights activist who stood up for the rights of African Americans. He insisted that everyone should be treated equally and everyone should have the same opportunities. In 1969, he was shot dead or assassinated. He did manage to change history, though, and Americans have a national holiday now, even named after him. In 1965, President Lyndon Johnson signed the law that would stop southern states preventing African Americans exercising their right to vote. That means people could no longer intimidate black people when they went to try and attend polling stations to vote. Martin Luther King and other civil rights leaders were present at that signing. In 2008, Barack Obama was elected the 44th President of the United States of America. Create your own timeline of Black history in the USA based on the events that we've covered in this PowerPoint, but you might also want to carry out some of your own research to have a little look at what else you could include about major political and cultural figures from the American history that you might want to include within your own timelines.